Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kutin.
This is Consider This. Now, 2019 was a tricky year for Pakatan Harapan. After winning GE14, the pressure was on for the new government to meet the high expectations of the electorate. But a series of astounding U-turns and repeated missed opportunities, all set against a backdrop of a slowing global economy, have created the perfect storm for a weakening of the coalition's stability. So what needs to change for the ruling government in 2020? Here to discuss this further, we have joining us in the studio Amir Farid Rahim, Director of Strategy for the Political Risk Consultancy KRA Group. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so we all agree it was a difficult year for Pakatan Harapan. And, you know, against all the many missteps that we saw last year for the Pakatan Harapan government, I'm wondering, in your opinion, Amir, what do you think has been the most damaging to public sentiment towards the government?
I think there's an array of issues that were mishandled throughout 2019. Of course, in 2018, the 6 months that they were in, it was a honeymoon period for Pakatan. But then, after a series of by-election defeats, and as you rightly pointed out, all the U-turns, I can't pinpoint like one particular event that stood out that was damaging for Pakatan, but it was a series of events. On the social-political front, especially on the Malay ground, it is a combination of the Jawi Khat issue, the Congress Maruah Melayu that was held by the NGO in University Malaya. This did, and of course, about a month ago, the return of Chin Peng's Communist Party's ashes back to the country. This combination of events reinforce the narrative on the Malay ground that is espoused by the opposition coalition of especially of UMNO and that of PAS, that the Pakatan government is not protecting the Malay majority interests as well as the Muslim electorates.
I do want to ask you, I mean, if you could just sort of balance that against the backdrop of also the number of leaders from UMNO in particular who are now standing trial for alleged corruption. Now, is that at all important to this Malay ground that you speak about?
Surprisingly, it is not. Okay, one of the things that you will often hear when you are on the ground talking to the electorate, this particular segment of voters, they will tell you like, and it has changed. About a year ago, it did matter. It did matter, but they. Sorry to say, not many people understand the legal process, and they feel that the lengthy legal process and the fact that some of these leaders who've been charged have not been put into jail. These laymen are questioning, like, you know, if they are still out there, that means that they are not guilty. They are okay. And it's just like political character assassination from the government. So that is the narrative that is forming, and the whole idea that, and has taken great momentum over the past year, is whether or not Pakatan Harapan will be a one-term government. And sad to say that in a study that we did in November, which is a nationwide poll, more than half, like 60% of Malaysians tend to agree that Pakatan Harapan may be a one-term government. And if they don't rebut this, then therein lies this problem moving forward.
All right, so that's interesting, right? Because the first 6 months is a honeymoon period, as you put it, and the past year has been a series of many missteps. So now in the remaining half of the term that they have, what that needs to change? So what could be the pivotal point for Pakatan Harapan in 2020?
Well, first of all, I think the biggest enemy that Pakatan has at the moment is its own self. And you look at the cabinet. So of course, it's not right to blame the cabinet fully on some of these issues, but they could have handled themselves better. A lot of the miscommunication within government. Okay, I take for an example, people used to complain there's lack of direction, there's lack of clarity. But the government has come out with that, come out to answer these issues by producing things like the Shared Prosperity Vision, for instance, on the economic side, which I think is a very good document. But
the big but there.
Exactly. You don't see this being communicated properly. You do not see this being as a document treated as a living document that is then used as a guideline to build your budgets and stuff like that.
Is the problem Dr. Mahathir himself? I mean, he is the leader of this government. I mean, it's his administration. He has the chief responsibility of keeping everybody on message, or even being producing a kind of clarity about what the message is. Do you think he is just, in many ways, not the Mahathir that we knew of the 22 years, of a man of tremendous clarity about his own vision? You know, never mind the rest of the country, but he had his own, he had his own story to tell. I mean, do you think that this is a problem of leadership?
Well, I think it's of Dr. Mahathir finding it difficult to adjust to the political dynamics of Pakatan Harapan, because say 20 years ago he could it's his vision, like you rightly pointed out, and all the other parties just bowing down to this idea of a very strong leader, one vision, whatever he says goes. But now even I think Dr. Mahathir, of course, is well advanced in age, finds it, one, is difficult to understand the political, to balance the political dynamics and making compromises within Pakatan itself and coming to decisions. But two, is also judging reaction of the public. The expectations are far greater this time, and of course we have social media, right? So this goes back to my point, like, back to clarity, right? It's not just about having a document, for instance, but it's you make one decision, you stick to that decision, because obviously you've discussed this decision.
Sure.
So when you communicate it, it's following up on these decisions. You can't bow down so easily to pressure from especially within your own government. So these kind of things sends a very bad signal, not just to foreign investors, but local business community and local, the lay Malaysians as well, because you see that you don't, then what happens is you don't take the government decision seriously, because you know that one day they can, it can be they can be U-turn so easily. So partly to answer your question, whether it's a leadership problem, I hope to see in 2020 that the leadership is firmer on these issues. Certain issues you've discussed, you've decided on, you should just execute. The problem of execution and with U-turns and reviews, how many times you want to review the thing, is actually causing a lot of confusion. No one is making the decision.
Quick. Sure.
Will a transition in leadership solve the problem for Pakatan?
It's very difficult to pinpoint whether it will or not, but it, I think, will provide, again, greater clarity, to probably provide a new momentum, a wave of change at the top, and in terms of decision-making process, and probably gives fresh breath of fresh air to what has been, what we've seen is more staling of the air.
Well, let's come back to that, because I definitely want to continue this conversation on the transition of leadership in or the expected transition of leadership in 2020. That's coming up next on Consider This. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kutan, and we're chatting tonight to Amir Farid Rahim, Director of Strategy at KRA Group, talking about what's in store for Pakatan Harapan in 2020. Now, senior leadership has indicated that there could be a transition of power after APAC this year. So we're looking at November. Amir, are you putting a lot of stock in those rumours?
Well, this you've heard these rumours since the start of the PH administration, and the timeline has been changing. But what I would like to point out in my the study that we did in early November, sadly 70% of Malaysians that we interviewed, sample size 1,005, which included Sabah and Sarawak as well, do not really give much attention to whether or not there is a transition of power.
Why do you suspect that's
because
the case?
I think the thing is people are more concerned about bread and butter issues. But of course, if they were to delve into it more deeply, then they would understand that change in power at the top means there'll be change in policies that may benefit them better. But people don't look at it that way. They just feel like, you know, as long they take the policy of Pakatan Harapan in totality, and it's not about who is there on top, who will help these most vulnerable people the most.
Right. Well, as you were saying in the earlier segment, you said that it will provide an opportunity. A change at the top will provide an opportunity for a new narrative, a breath of fresh air, perhaps a renewed interest in what the leadership is doing. I do want to ask you, though, there seems to be several segments, right? You talk about the Malay segment, so that I'm sure is also in itself not homogenous. People look at different instances and have different interpretations. So the Congress Maruah Melayu made everybody unhappy, the Liberal segment as well as the conservative Malay segment. So let's just talk about this Liberal segment, because I do wonder, though, about the way this government is signaling to that Liberal segment, small as it may be, but important because it often includes the most progressive, dynamic sectors of Malaysian society.
No, I think this current government's approach to the Liberal segment, as you pointed it out, that group, is really taking them for granted. I've got to say this because they feel that the Liberals, at the end of the day, would not vote for the other side. And whatever they do now, because there's still 3 years to go to the elections, the Liberals will hopefully still stick with the current government.
Yeah, but Liberals, of course, have the other choice, which is not to vote at all, which also can be very damaging.
Which I think they have not put that in calculation yet. To them, they feel that the values that they espouse at the moment will still align with the Liberals, because the gulf between the Liberals and that of the very ultra-conservative UMNO PAS is just too deep for any ratification.
So on that note, I'm just wondering whether you think there is a gap within the Malaysian political scene that will then cater to these forsaken Liberals, you know, the Liberals taken for granted.
Well, there's of course that talk always of a third force,
yes,
things like that. There is, if you know, like Future Forward Party in Thailand, Tanaton, a fresh face. Probably the youngsters would all go for these kind of politicians and political parties. I think there is that market space there, but it's got to be led by new bunch of leaders.
New blood.
Yeah, new blood, because you see, this is the price that you've got to pay for having a 94-year-old as the Prime Minister. You've got to skip a couple of generations of leadership. So if you want a rejuvenation of the political scene, it's got to be those in their mid-30s to early 40s, that very new faces, not from political dynasties, fresh people with ideas. There are so many smart Malaysians out there.
So not Nurul Izzah, not Rafizi Ramli, not Khairi Jamaluddin, all of whom often get mentioned when people talk about the third force, which leads me to this idea that people actually don't know what they mean when they say a third force.
Exactly. So to different people, it's different interpretation, but third force, of course, these three names that you've mentioned, YB Izzah, YB Khairi, Rafizi, they are tried and tested. So they and still considered young given the current median age of top leadership, right? So some people do want that these personalities to lead, but even if they were to come in as a third force, it is better to see newer faces, fresher faces, those without baggage, because you can experiment with young people, but it's got to be young with slight more experience.
Okay, I do want to ask you
Young with
this.
experience.
Okay,
Yes.
so
That's
this
a-
is-
it's ironic.
we're talking about the choices that are there, but there's also the game itself which might be changed, and this coming after,
Electoral
because the Undi 18
Yeah.
initiative passed, and also I believe the Election Reform Committee
Yes.
is now proposing a proportional representation, party list system, possibly. What's your take on this?
Okay.
Is this going to change Malaysian politics forever?
It will, and I hope so, in a good way, that is, because if you play by the current rules, first past the post system, I am afraid that when it comes to 2023, you'll see a revert to pre-2018 kind of like battle lines, and it will just benefit the established parties, big names. If you want to encourage a flourishing of democracy with little parties, or even like partyless system, personality driven and stuff like that, these kind of reforms need to take place. Proportional representation is a very interesting idea. Undi 18 in itself, it's I think the biggest success of Pakatan into 2019, yeah, in terms of legislative victory. Like not just legislative victory, but it is a constitutional change, right? And what I personally as a voter also hope to see with more 18-year-olds voting is that it will flush out those politicians who campaign using the old system, old style, old rhetoric.
Right.
Because, you know, it's sad to say that some of these kind of like, these politicians still get away with old style of politics in this new age, and we're going to the new decade. Hopefully, with more 18-year-olds coming in, they will
Sure.
be able to vote them out.
And I think, okay, so it's a false assumption to assume that all young voters, young people are liberal in their thinking, right, and will vote that way. But I can safely say that many young voters are just tired of the politicking. Right? So Pakatan Harapan has spent the last year busy politicking.
Yep.
So what will they need to do to kind of, beyond the Sadiq rhetoric, what will they need to do to win over these young voters?
Well, first of all, they've got to present a fresh a fresh approach to politics. Yeah, if we want to see, because all I'm seeing at the moment, the past 18 months in Pakatan, is just them being government by default. So they go into a very government setting. Okay, so with this Undi 18, what I hope to see is the approach to politics to change completely, for them to be able to nowadays, like there are some ministers and politicians who still get away with no social media presence whatsoever. But as you need to embrace this age group, I want to see them on not just your standard social media, Facebook, YouTube, and all the other applications, but on TikTok, for instance. And I want to see what my MP does. I want to know what they're up to. I want to know their voting records. I want to
Transparency.
greater transparency, what they do in Parliament. Parliamentary reforms is also very important. You need to empower Parliament to show that when you talk about politicians, it's not just the ministers that's working, it is the MPs themselves working, championing bills.
And we see some of that already happening. We know parliamentary reforms are afoot. We've had standing committees, hopefully get the resources and so on and so forth. But what about and I want to just segue a little from the politicians. Are we asking the right questions of our politicians? I mean, we in the media, I mean, this is supposed to be an era of freedom, but is the media actually just as slavish to power as they were before? Not investing in things like investigative journalism, so on and so forth. Have we, the rest of us, the country, apart from our politicians, lived up to the promise of this transition? Are we using it properly?
You can be honest with us.
Yeah,
It's okay.
well, no, I think some quarters, even the media, we understand how challenging the media industry is in terms of survival for business. And to say that it's as slavish as it was before, I don't think. I do see as a consumer of media, I do see the freedom there. But whether they're asking the right questions, yeah, that is a bit tough, because you can't. not all journalists are equal, right? Like sometimes, sorry to say, they're not asking the prodding the right, the putting forward the right questions, and this requires a generational change in journalism among journalists to keep those in power honest and transparent as much as you can.
Okay. Well, we're going to come back, continue this conversation, and take a closer look at Sabah Sarawak next on Consider This. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you tonight. We're talking tonight to Amir Farid Rahim from KRA Group. Now, I understand KRA did that poll recently, the survey back in November, gauging public sentiment. I want to know specifically to Sabah and Sarawak what you heard on the ground there.
One thing that I've got to that is consistent in both Sabah and Sarawak, they're very upset with prices of goods. Okay, so it's not part of cost of living component, but the fact that prices in Sabah and Sarawak are just extraordinarily higher compared to some parts of Peninsular Malaysia. So discrepancy in price is driving.
Right. So one of the problems over the years was this cabotage system, right?
Yes.
And the fact that goods are imported through the peninsula to get to Sabah and Sarawak. In the demand for greater autonomy that Sabah and Sarawakians seem to want for themselves and a change of a relationship with the Federation, do you see there some serious challenges to the general political dynamic, that Sabah and Sarawak are not going to play ball or play second fiddle to peninsular parties and their view of the country?
I think definitely it's 2018. We've seen it already in Sabah, where Warisan won I say handsomely for a party that was formed a couple of years before that. And Datuk Sri Shafiq Afdal is a very respected leader of Sabah, and also widely respected in Sarawak. So he has been paving the way that they can extract more. They want to be autonomous, can extract more. They want to govern themselves. And if you look at Pakatan's track record, the by-election that Pakatan won was in Sandakan. It's in Sabah. If they can repeat it in Kimanis in a couple of weeks' time, it shows that in Sabah they can govern, and this then will go will feed into their strategy of how to battle GPS in the incumbent government in Sarawak at the moment. But key is cost of living, economic opportunities, and of course job opportunities. Sabah, as more compared to Sarawak, Sabah's big problem, the big noise from Sabah is on job opportunities.
Jobs, okay.
So let's turn Sarawak, because 2020 is likely to have the state elections. It used to be it was easier to differentiate between the contenders in Sarawak. Seems less so, because they're all singing the same tune when it comes to Sarawak autonomy, right? Yes. So we're talking about Sarawak. How do you think it's going to play out for Pakatan? How does Pakatan assert itself, take over the state, if that's their idea, against this backdrop?
I think it's going to be very tough, because the two main component parties that Pakatan rely on in Sarawak is PKR and DAP. I think DAP has maxed out its urban seats in Sarawak from the last elections, and whereas PKR, we've seen the infighting in the two different camps there in Sarawak. So basically the past 1 year has been paralyzed in Sarawak. So it's going to be an uphill battle, and Bersatu has also entered the fray in Sarawak, but it's still a very new party, and the sentiment of a local Sarawak party is still strong. So to me, I feel because Sarawak, not just that it's tough for new entrants, new parties, because of the whole infrastructure challenge to Sarawak, but also I'm seeing the narrative is the fear that things didn't get better in the peninsula when they changed in 2018. why should we risk it by changing in Sarawak state elections and voting out GPS? So that is the underlying sentiment in Sarawak that I can feel.
Okay. Well, in the couple of minutes that we have left, Amir, I just want to get a sense from you where you think this year is going to take us. You know, I mean, we saw 2019, as you said earlier, a year full of politicking for Pakatan Harapan. What is expected coming up in this year?
Well, one big thing that is happening in 2020, I'm not talking about transition, is the APEC itself. So that puts us in the international spotlight. So everyone should, if I were in government, advising people in government, should just get their act together because the world is watching us. We are on global stage. But then again, we realize that there's also a PPBM Bersatu party elections in the first half of the year. So we would expect politicking, although probably not of the same scale as PKR's well-documented issues. But having said that, there's many senior ministers who are vying for position in Bersatu. So expect a lot of political posturing, and this will as again dominate the whole discussion on where the politics shall head.
So more of the same, or are you optimistic that Pakatan Harapan is listening to some of the mistakes that they made, paying attention to the mistakes that they made and learning lessons of 2019?
The thing is, they've had multiple by-election losses, and every time there's a defeat, everyone says, time to listen, heed the lessons and all that. But I don't think they have heeded the right lessons. Of course, there's still 3 years to go. There are a lot of things that can be done to correct the course, and I hope they do listen and learn the right lessons from all the different issues that have and challenges that have cropped up in 2019 and do better in 2020.
There you go. That's hoping that they'll do better in 2020. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Amir. That's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris with me, Sharaad Kutan, signing off. Happy New Year to you, and thank you for watching. Good night.
Thank you.